I raised her kids like they were my own, then she told me I was just some guy she married. I paid the bills, took care of her kids, and gave them everything they needed, but the moment I set boundaries, they turned on me. Her son scratched my car, her daughter mocked me, and she let it all happen because I was never really family to them. So I walked away, cut them off completely, and now they're drowning in the mess they created. I've always believed in a few simple but powerful things: hard work, loyalty, and responsibility. These aren't just empty words to me, they're the foundation of the life I built, the principles that shaped every decision I ever made. I was raised to believe that if you put in the effort, if you stay committed, if you take care of the people around you, then life will reward you. Maybe not with riches or fame, but with something even more valuable: respect, love, and a sense of purpose. For most of my life, I lived by those beliefs. I worked my ass off. I kept my promises. I never ran from my responsibilities, no matter how tough things got. And above all, I valued loyalty. You stand by your people. You don't turn your back on them. That's what I believed. That's what I lived. But the thing about beliefs is, they're only as strong as the people you place your trust in. See, I used to think that if you gave your best to someone, they'd give you their best in return. That if you loved with your whole heart, people would love you back just as fiercely. That if you sacrificed, worked, and fought for your family, they'd see it, appreciate it, and stand by you. I was wrong. This is a story about how I learned that lesson the hard way. It's not a happy story, and I won't sugarcoat anything. It's about being used, being taken for granted, and finally understanding when it's time to walk away. Because sometimes the hardest thing you'll ever do isn't fighting for the people you love, it's realizing that they were never fighting for you in the first place. I met Amelia on a warm September afternoon. It wasn't anything dramatic, no whirlwind romance, no love at first sight. Just two people introduced through a mutual friend at a backyard barbecue. She stood out to me, but not in the way you'd expect. She wasn't the loudest in the room, nor was she particularly outgoing. If anything, she looked exhausted. Not just tired, I mean the kind of exhaustion that sinks into your bones, the kind that makes your shoulders slump and your smile barely reach your eyes. She had that hollow, I'm running on fumes look, and the moment I saw her, I just knew she was carrying too much weight on her shoulders. Amelia was a widow. Her husband, a military officer, had passed away when their kids were still little. That's how she was introduced to me, a strong woman raising two kids on her own, trying her best despite the circumstances. Her son, Daniel, was about 4 years old, a little ball of endless energy running around the yard like he had rockets strapped to his feet. His younger sister, Mia, had just started walking. She clung to her mother's leg, wobbling on uncertain steps, her big, round eyes taking in the world. At first, I wasn't sure why I paid so much attention to them. Maybe it was because I was raised to respect single mothers, to understand that life doesn't give everyone a fair hand, and when you see someone struggling, you help. Maybe it was because Amelia reminded me of someone I used to know, a person who never asked for help but desperately needed it. Or maybe deep down I just saw them and thought I could be good for them. I didn't start out trying to be a father figure. It wasn't like I walked in thinking, this is my family now. No, it was simpler than that. At first, it was little things, offering to carry something heavy for Amelia, distracting Daniel while she tried to feed Mia, picking up a fallen toy before the baby could start crying. Small, natural gestures that didn't mean much. But I kept seeing them. Amelia and I started talking more. I learned how much she had been through, how hard it was to raise two kids alone, how she never had time for herself, how she was barely holding everything together. I saw it in the way she'd rub her temples when she thought no one was looking. In the way she'd laugh, but it never quite reached her eyes. And how she'd double-check every grocery receipt because every dollar mattered. So I started helping out more. I watched the kids so she could get a moment to breathe. I ran errands when she was too exhausted to leave the house. At first, she resisted, insisted she could do it on her own. But eventually she let me in, just a little. And before I knew it, I wasn't just helping out. I was invested. Somewhere along the way, I realized I didn't just want to make things easier for them, I wanted to be a part of their lives. Not to replace their father, but to fill the empty space he left behind. I wanted to give Daniel someone to look up to, someone to toss a football with, to show him how to ride a bike. I wanted to be the person who kissed Mia's scraped knee when she fell, who taught her how to hold a pencil, who made sure she felt safe. And Amelia. I wanted her to breathe again. To know she wasn't alone. At the time, it felt right. It felt like I was doing something good, something meaningful. Looking back, maybe I was a little too eager, a little too hopeful. Maybe I wanted to believe that love, effort, and sacrifice would be enough. But life has a funny way of proving you wrong. At first, it was just small things helping out here and there, stepping in when Amelia needed a break. But over time, I became more than just the guy she was dating. I was the one tucking Daniel in at night, reading him bedtime stories, making sure he brushed his teeth. I was the one rocking Mia back to sleep when she woke up crying, holding her tiny body against my chest until she calmed down. I was there for the scraped knees, the temper tantrums, the first lost tooth. It felt natural. It felt right. Amelia never asked me to take on this role, but she didn't stop me either. And the kids? They accepted me. Maybe because they were too young to know any different, maybe because deep down they just wanted someone to fill the empty space their father left behind. Whatever the reason, they started calling me Dad. The first time Daniel said it, I remember feeling something shift inside me. It wasn't forced, wasn't something I had to correct or remind him of. He just said it as if it had always been that way. And I let myself believe that it meant something. I worked hard to give them everything they needed. I put in long hours to make sure there was always food on the table, that they had new clothes, that they went to good schools. I took them to soccer games, dance recitals, school plays. I sat in the front row, cheering the loudest, feeling like I belonged, like I had built something real. On weekends, we had our little traditions, movie nights with popcorn, trips to the park, Sunday morning pancakes. I wanted them to have stability, to know that they could always count on me. Looking back, I should have seen the signs, the little cracks forming beneath the surface. There were moments, brief and subtle, where I felt like an outsider. The way Amelia would hesitate sometimes before backing me up when I disciplined the kids. The way she would get quiet whenever their late father came up in conversation. The way Daniel, as he got older, started pushing boundaries, not just in the typical teenage way, but with something sharper, something more deliberate. At first, I brushed it off. Kids test limits, I told myself. They push back when they feel safe. But maybe deep down, I just didn't want to see what was really happening. For years, I gave everything I had to them. I worked, I provided, I showed up. I thought love and effort would be enough. I thought I had built a family. But the thing about illusions is they only last as long as you're willing to ignore the truth. And I was about to learn just how fragile it all really was. It wasn't one big moment that changed everything. It was little things, tiny shifts in behavior that on their own didn't seem like much. A sigh when I asked Daniel to do his homework. An eye roll from Mia when I reminded her to clear her plate. A sarcastic tone creeping into their voices, the kind that made my stomach twist just a little. At first, I told myself it was normal, kids grow up. They get attitudes, they push back. But something about it felt different. Daniel was around 13 when I really started to feel it. He was testing limits, not in a rebellious way but in a way that felt pointed, calculated. He'd stay out later than he was supposed to, ignore my rules, act like my authority didn't mean anything. If I called him out, he'd brush me off with a relax, it's not a big deal, or why do you even care? And the worst part? Amelia barely reacted. If anything, she seemed uncomfortable when I tried to discipline him, like she didn't want to get involved. Mia followed her brother's lead. By the time she hit 11, she had the same dismissive attitude, the same way of making me feel like I was just some guy in the house instead of the man who had been raising them for years. If I told her to pick up after herself, she'd scoff or mutter something under her breath. It wasn't outright defiance, not yet, but it was enough to sting. The real problem wasn't just the kids, it was Amelia. She let it happen. She never backed me up. If I told Daniel no, she'd turn around and let him do it anyway. If Mia was being disrespectful, she'd shrug and say, she's just tired. Every time I tried to set boundaries, she found a way to undermine them. And maybe she didn't do it on purpose, but the effect was the same. I was losing my place in the house, and they were starting to see me as someone they didn't have to listen to. I was exhausted. I was working long hours to keep us comfortable, coming home to a house where I felt less and less welcome. I started questioning myself. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe I was too strict. Maybe if I just gave it time, things would get better. But deep down, I think I already knew. The family I thought I had wasn't as solid as I believed. And I was the only one who hadn't realized it yet. It happened on a night that should have been like any other. Daniel had been testing limits for years by this point, but that night, he took it further. He came home well past curfew, hours late with no call, no text, no explanation. I had been sitting in the living room, waiting, worry twisting into frustration. When he finally strolled in, casual as ever, I stood up and asked him where he'd been. Nothing harsh, nothing aggressive, just a simple question. He didn't even look at me. Just shrugged. Relax, I'm not a kid. That was it. No apology, no remorse, just pure dismissal. I took a deep breath, keeping my voice steady. That's not the point. We had a rule. You broke it. I was worried. And then, without hesitation, he said the words that changed everything. You're not my real dad. Stop acting like you own me. It was like a punch to the gut. A cold, sharp blow that knocked the wind out of me. Before I could even process it, Mia chimed in from behind him, arms crossed, eyes filled with the same defiance. Yeah, she said. You're just some guy Mom married. Just some guy. Years of bedtime stories, of scraped knees and school plays, of working late nights so they'd have everything they needed, all reduced to nothing. I turned to Amelia, waiting, hoping she'd step in, that she'd say something, anything. But she didn't. She just sat there, scrolling through her phone like she hadn't heard a thing. And when she finally did look up, it wasn't with anger or disappointment. It wasn't even with sympathy. They have a point, Thomas, she said, her voice flat. Maybe you should back off. That was the moment. The breaking point. I had spent years believing we were a family. That my love, my effort, my sacrifices meant something. That no matter what, I was building something real. But in that moment I realized the truth. I was nothing more than a convenience. A provider. A placeholder for the man they actually saw as their father. And the worst part? Amelia had encouraged it. Not just allowed it, encouraged it. She admitted it, sneering as she said, I told them not to let you control them. I raised them alone before you, and I can do it again. All the missing pieces fell into place. The subtle way she had undermined me, the lack of support, the way the kids grew bolder in their disrespect. She had been feeding them this narrative all along, letting them believe that no matter what I did for them, I wasn't really part of their family. I stood there, numb, staring at the woman I had once loved, at the kids I had raised as my own. And then, for the first time in years, I felt absolutely nothing. No anger. No sadness. Just clarity. I had spent too long fighting for a place in a family that had never truly been mine. And now finally I was done. I didn't leave that night. Not yet. But something inside me shut off. A switch flipped and I stopped caring. Not in a dramatic storm out the door kind of way, but in a quiet, deliberate way that made all the difference. I was done giving. Done trying. Done being their safety net. I had spent years making sure they had everything they needed, good schools, new clothes, a comfortable home, money for whatever they asked for. I had given them my time, my energy, my love. And for what? To be told I was just some guy Mom married? To have my role in their lives dismissed like it meant nothing? Fine. If that's how they saw me, then they could live without me. The next morning I started making changes. No more rides to school. No more allowances. No more covering extra expenses. I wasn't paying for their weekend outings, their sports fees, or their new clothes. When Daniel rolled his eyes and asked for money to go out with his friends, I just said, ask your mom. When Mia pouted about needing a new phone case, I told her, that's not my problem. First they laughed. Shrugged it off like it was a game. They were used to getting what they wanted and they assumed I'd cave eventually. But I didn't. And slowly the reality of it started to sink in. The shopping trips stopped. The fast food outings became rare. New clothes weren't showing up in their closets anymore. School fees started becoming an issue. The little luxuries they had always taken for granted vanished. I watched as their arrogance turned to frustration. Daniel missed the ride I used to give him to school and had to sprint for the bus, barely making it. Mia's phone broke, and when she turned to Amelia, expecting an easy replacement, she got a quiet, strained, not right now. And Amelia? She tried to keep things going, but her finances were nowhere near enough to maintain the lifestyle I had been providing. She had relied on me for too long and now reality was hitting her hard. She scrambled to pick up the slack, but it didn't take long before the cracks started to show. The kids started fighting more. The house felt different, tense, uneasy, like they were finally realizing what they had lost. And still, I said nothing. I let them struggle. I let them feel the weight of their own entitlement. It was a waiting game now. And I was perfectly fine waiting. It didn't happen all at once. At first, they thought they could adjust, that things would go back to the way they were. But as the weeks passed, the illusion started to crumble. Daniel missed school a few times, first because he overslept after staying up too late, then because he missed the bus and had no ride. He had never worried about it before because I had always been there to drive him. Now he was scrambling. Amelia tried to step in, but her work schedule didn't allow it. I heard her arguing with him one morning, her voice sharp as she told him to figure it out himself. Mia, the one who always had the newest clothes, started wearing the same outfits more often. Her favorite hoodie got a stain on it and there was no quick replacement. She complained about her phone lagging, the cracked screen that used to be a minor inconvenience now an actual problem. Before, she would have just whined until I fixed it or got her a new one. Now, there was no easy fix. Amelia's struggles became more obvious too. She had prided herself on keeping things running smoothly, on making it seem like she was in control. But without my financial support, she was drowning. Bills piled up. Grocery store runs became more calculated with fewer extras. The weekend takeout meals disappeared. The energy in the house shifted. The smug looks, the eye rolls, the dismissive comments, they all started to fade. The confidence they had when they told me I wasn't their real dad? It was cracking under the weight of reality. And then came the moment I knew was inevitable. Amelia tried to reel me back in. It started with little things. A softer tone when she spoke to me, asking how my day was, trying to bring back the warmth she used to fake so well. She started making coffee for me again in the mornings, like she used to in the beginning, back when we actually felt like a team. Then came the casual comments about how the kids were just going through a phase and they didn't mean what they said. I wasn't biting. So she pushed harder. One night, after the kids had gone to bed, she sat across from me at the kitchen table, a sad, tired look on her face. I know things have been tense, she said softly, reaching for my hand. But we're still a family. We can fix this. I just looked at her. Family? Now she wanted to use that word? Now that the money was gone, now that the kids were struggling, now that the weight of her own decisions had come crashing down? I pulled my hand away, stood up, and simply said, I don't think so. For the first time in a long time, Amelia had nothing to say. She just sat there silent as the reality of the situation finally settled in. I wasn't coming back. And no amount of manipulation was going to change that. When it finally sank in that I wasn't coming back, that I wasn't going to be their doormat, provider, or punching bag anymore, things took a turn. The kids, who had once been so smug and sure of themselves, started acting out. It started small, sarcastic remarks, ignoring me completely when I spoke. That was nothing new. But then it escalated. My personal belongings started going missing. A watch I had owned for years gone. A set of car keys mysteriously misplaced. At first, I chalked it up to coincidence, but then I noticed Daniel wearing a hoodie I had been looking for, acting like it had always been his. When I called him out on it, he just smirked and shrugged. Then one morning I went outside and found a long, deep scratch running down the side of my car. It was fresh. Deliberate. I didn't need to ask who had done it. I didn't explode. I didn't confront them. I didn't argue. Instead, I did something smarter. I started collecting evidence. I installed security cameras around the house, discreetly placed where they wouldn't notice. I started keeping track of every missing item, every act of retaliation. Then I backed up my personal files, my financial documents, and anything else I knew I might need. I wasn't just preparing to leave, I was preparing for war. Because I knew what was coming. Amelia wasn't going to just let me walk away. She had spent years making sure I felt obligated to stay, and now she was going to do everything she could to pull me back in. But this time I was ready. I consulted a lawyer. I explained everything, laid out the years I had spent supporting them, the gaslighting, the emotional manipulation, the disrespect. I showed him the security footage of Daniel and Mia rummaging through my closet, laughing as they shredded my clothes. The lawyer sat back, exhaled, and said, "You're doing the right thing. And you need to leave soon." So I started planning my exit. It wasn't going to be dramatic. No yelling, no last-minute arguments. Just a clean, permanent break. Amelia and her kids had made their choice and now I was making mine. I was done. Done being used. Done being disrespected. Done pretending this was a family. The only thing left to do now was walk away. I waited until the house was empty. I didn't want a scene, didn't want any last-minute manipulation, any pleading or fake apologies. I packed a single bag, just the essentials. Everything else? They could have it. The furniture, the appliances, the things I had worked so hard to provide, none of it mattered anymore. What mattered was getting out, reclaiming my life, and never looking back. Before I left, I placed an envelope on the kitchen counter. Inside were the divorce papers, the security footage, and copies of every financial document showing how much I had supported them. I left a brief note. "You wanted to do this without me. Now you can." Then I walked out. I didn't tell them where I was going. I didn't answer their calls. And most importantly, I cut off every financial tie. The joint accounts? Closed. Credit cards? Cancelled. Amelia's access to my money? Gone. For the first time in years, they were truly on their own. And the reaction? Exactly what I expected. At first, it was rage. Voicemails filled with screaming, accusations that I was a coward, that I was abandoning them, that I was heartless. Daniel and Mia sent messages too, mocking at first, thinking I'd come crawling back. But I didn't. Then came denial. Amelia told herself, and everyone around her, that she didn't need me, that she could handle everything on her own. She put up a front, pretending things were fine. But cracks started to show. Because for the first time, reality was hitting them. The bills weren't magically getting paid. The grocery store trips were tighter. The little luxuries, the ones they had never thought twice about, were gone. And suddenly they weren't so sure of themselves anymore. It took 3 weeks before the messages started changing. The anger turned to frustration. Then confusion. Then, finally, regret. Daniel's texts stopped being arrogant. Mia, the one who had always followed his lead, sent me a message late one night. Just 3 words. I miss you. Too little. Too late. I didn't answer. They had made their choice. And I had finally made mine. At first, I ignored their messages. Not out of spite, not because I wanted them to suffer, but because I had nothing left to say. They had made it painfully clear that I was nothing more than a convenience to them, a wallet, a driver, a provider. Not a father. Not family. And now that the reality of their choices had set in, they were starting to realize just how much I had actually done for them. Daniel's messages came first. At first, they were casual, almost smug. Guess you really ran off, huh? Mom's pissed. Good luck with your new life. Then as the weeks passed, the arrogance faded. His texts turned shorter, less confident. Things are kinda rough here. I don't know, man. I guess I just thought you'd still be around. Mia followed soon after. She never had the same ego Daniel did, and I think she struggled with what had happened more than he did. One night, late, she sent me just 3 words. I miss you. It should have meant something. Maybe once it would have. But by the time I saw those words on my screen, all I felt was emptiness. I sat there, staring at the message, thinking back to everything. The bedtime stories, the birthday parties, the Christmas mornings. The times I stayed up late helping with school projects, the rides to practice, the unconditional support. The years I gave them. And I thought about the night Daniel looked me in the eye and said, "You're not my real dad." How Mia had stood beside him, backing him up, like all those years had meant nothing. How Amelia had sat there and let it happen. They had shown me exactly who they were. And now? Now that the money was gone, now that life had gotten harder, now that they were finally feeling the consequences of their entitlement, now they miss me? I didn't answer. I could have. I could have given them another chance, let them apologize, let them explain. But deep down, I knew the truth. They didn't miss me. They missed what I gave them. They missed the comfort, the security, the life I had built for them. And I wasn't about to make the same mistake twice. So I put my phone down, took a deep breath, and moved on. For the first time in years, I chose myself.